Welcome Beetle Ute builders, Smyth Performance Beetle Ute builders. I made 3 quick videos on the bull bar, the light bar, and the Jeep rear bumper to go on Facebook. And then, you know what, that stuff gets lost. So here's a YouTube video that you can always come back to and find if you need it for reference. So we're gonna take the camera off and go have a look at each of those, and I'll show you what I did to mount those. It's a Jeep TJ rear bumper, a Amazon light bar slash roll bar, and a bull bar off a Jeep CJ. Those 2 were Marketplace. You can find that stuff on Marketplace for pretty inexpensively. I'm gonna pop the camera off and we'll go through each of those pieces individually of how I made the mount and what exactly I did. It is a Jeep bull bar. I can't remember offhand. I think it's a CJ7. Came off of Marketplace. The customer brought it to me. He got it from Marketplace. I think he spent 50 bucks for it. Came with the brackets, but this was my technique. First off, note that there are no longer fog lights on this car. This car was originally a fog light car, and the spread here of the bull bar was about 2 inches off from actually fitting the bull bar through the fog light holes, which I thought would be really cool, but I would have to cut it, space it out, weld it to match that, and I gave up on doing that because it would have taken a whole bunch of time and I couldn't charge the customer for all that. So we switched it to a no fog light grill, and I used the wiring for the fog lights to power these 2 lights. So the headlight switch, that when you pull it out, it turns on the fog lights, now turns on these lights. These are actually driving lights, so there is a problem with that, and that is that they turn off when you turn on your high beams. So they only work with low beams, as how fog lights work. All right, that's a whole nother discussion. Really what we're gonna cover here is mounting. So I didn't alter that roll bar at all, or I'm sorry, the bull bar. It does have a bolt that comes from the backside in the end of it. So the brackets that came with it to mount it on the Jeep, I cut them off and they ended up looking about like this. I had the bumper cover off, so I had just the steel bumper there. And I had to go back and forth a few times. I also was, like, in my head, had it that we had to be able to remove this so it's easy to get the front clip on and off, right? Because the fenders and the bumper covers all come off as one piece. So I wanted it to bolt. So I ended up welding a bracket very similar to this. This is the factory bracket, well, the bracket that comes with the bull bar, but it was 1.5 inches too short. So I ended up making my own. I could have used this, but I would have had to cut away this top part here, and I was striving to get this centered on this centerpiece here. So the factory bracket would work, but you're going to end up having to notch right here, and I just thought this was more aesthetically pleasing. But it's pretty simple. You cut a slight angle on there to match the lip of the bumper, and then I welded it onto the bumper. You could bolt it, so you wouldn't necessarily have to do any welding to make this work, but drilling this heavy steel and that bumper takes a little bit, and you probably end up, and I'm talking about the actual crash bar steel bumper behind the plastic there, you probably end up having to take it off. It's not that big. Once you get the bumper cover off, it's not that hard to get the bumper off. It's the same as the rear bumper, and there is no crash attenuating pistons in it. It's just a straight bolt on, so it's fairly easy. But that's how the bracket came out. Slight angle there because that crash bar has a curve to it, and of course the passenger side, you know, is the opposite curve. And then I just made another one a little bit longer, and let's crouch down there and see. I think you'll be able to see a little bit of it. There you can see the bracket actually sticking out, and there's the bolt that actually holds it on. So this layer.
Down at Hester one?
Yep, down at the house. This layer is actually the piece that's the bracket, and you can see it comes up and you won't be able to see the crash bar where it bolts on. So that's how the bull bar went. And then of course, when I was all done, I sprayed it with Raptor liner. I put a couple of extra riv nuts in it to mount these lights. It is very, very tight against the bumper, but there really wasn't any way. I was trying to keep the whole thing behind the bumper. You can see where I cut out the grill here, and it actually sticks out a little bit, but that's okay. You can't tell when you're standing here. So it looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. The customer's happy with it. This is obviously an add-on bit, the license plate. He bought this car with $5 bills, so it's kind of a thing for him. So it's kind of cool to have that plate. So you don't have to have that plate on there. You could hang the lights from the bottom, or you can have them come up from the top, or there was another bracket that actually came from behind and came up a 90 facing forward, that the lights ended up in about the same place but bolted to that bracket. I decided to go with this. Lights, that's a whole nother discussion. There's a million things you could do for lights. We kind of like these because they, you know, we put some big round ones on there, but that crowded the license plate. It did fill that space a little better. I like the round ones because they kind of tie into the headlights, but the customer is very happy with these. And hey, what Joel wants is what I'm going to build. So there you have it. That's the bull bar. Hope that answers the questions that people may have. And you could use a bull bar from about anything. It's just your adaptation. It may be just slightly different. The previous Beetle I did with a bull bar on it, it was actually an F250 bull bar. And I mounted it a little bit different, but this is a much better way to do it. So I would recommend going this way. And actually, I'm calling it a roll bar, but technically it's a light bar. This is not heavy duty enough that if the car actually rolled over, it would support the weight of the car. I reinforced some of the stuff on it, but think of it as a light bar, and it's really for looks. Technically it's not a roll bar, but I may call it roll bar as I'm talking about it. This one is off of Amazon, 370 bucks shipped. It did come with the high mount brake light, which was great. That's why we ordered this one. It's actually, well, I don't know how many pieces it actually is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sort of 6 pieces. You have the 2 legs on this side, 2 legs on that side, and then a center piece that has a hole in it that bolts into the side pieces. So it is adjustable as it comes from Amazon, but of course this is super narrow and it does not adjust narrow enough for this car. I put it together and set it down on my Audi and it looked badass. I may order another one to put on the Audi just because I really like the way it looked. So modifications I did to try to get this to fit a little bit better. I cut the angle, so there's a captive nut in the center of each of these tubes, but there's probably 1/2 inch of sheet metal past the captive nut. So I had just enough room that I could cut a slightly different angle on here to get it to lean forward just a little more, because I'm trying to match the angle of the cab. It stood upright just a little bit more. You could achieve that by other means, but that's how I did it, and it came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. So that was modification number 1, and of course you have to do all four tubes. That worked out pretty well. Let me rewind. I knew we were going to put this on when I was building the car. So I built the car before I put the fiberglass fenders on the inside of the bed and the top of the bed, the actual aluminum bed wall. So inside of here, I epoxied, used 3M panel bond, a piece of this almost 1/4 inch steel angle iron, but it's steel. And I epoxied a 3M panel bonded that in from here to about here, right where the brace, where the top of the wheel well brace goes inside right here. the idea was to give me something to bolt to besides just wear one layer of aluminum. Now you could accomplish that same method by putting a riv nut in there, and that would work. You're going through 2 layers of aluminum, right? Because the cap, so you go through the cap, the layer of fiberglass, and then the top rail of the aluminum. So there's a little bit of material there, but in this particular case, I just tapped this. I drilled and tapped this out. So these bolts go right into the tapped steel. So that's kind of a little bit heavier duty than it was really built. And I could add a couple of bolts here if I needed. I really don't want to, and I honestly think with the 4 bolts that are holding these, making this any stronger isn't gonna do anything for us. So I think these 4 bolts, 2 on each side, is sufficient. So we're gonna run with those. So that happened. I glued that angle steel in there before I built the car, but you could come up with other plans. Okay, so then modification number 2 was to narrow it. The first bit of that was cutting out, what is that, about 18 inches of the center tube. And now this has been laying in my scrap pile for a couple of weeks, and so that's why it's all rusty. It wasn't originally rusty. So I took the center piece of this roll bar that's in there and cut it in half, cut out that much from it, and then welded it back together just to make it that much shorter to narrow this bar. And there's 2 pieces in there. So these are the 2 tubes that I shortened, and then the outer tubes bolt in. Let's see, is that light? That light's still on. You can see the bolt that goes in. So it's these tubes, and they have a flare on them, which is why I cut these down in the center and welded them back together. Put a little reinforcing tube inside it and then welded it all together, so there's actually 3 pieces. So that's how I shortened that center piece, so that I could get the adjustability to get narrow enough. But when you narrow that, then this sort of cap plate that fits on here, it was obviously way too long, so I had to cut this edge down because it stuck out too far. So mark those down, cut those down, and that was the modifications to get the width correct. Other than that, it mounts up pretty much how it's supposed to. And then of course I fished the wires through. I came out in my normal place for doing a bed light up underneath that front rail there behind the Smyth. And I put a T in that, so I have a light there, and then it also comes up, that one we were looking at just a minute ago, a white LED for bed lighting. So when you open the door, that guy comes on to light up the bed, as does the one up underneath here. And then of course heavy duty wiring for these roof lights. Watch out for whatever state you're in. In California, I've gotten tickets for not having overhead lights covered on the road. I have not had that happen to me in Florida. I don't know about other states, but be cognizant of whatever lights you decide to put up top. In your state, they may be required to be covered when you're on city roads, or you know, on real roads and not off-road. So consider that. These lights don't have covers, and it would be a pain in the ass to try to fabricate a nice clean looking cover for them. But we're in Florida and nobody really cares here, as long as you're not driving with them on the road. And then of course the brake light. So instead of bringing my 3rd brake light wiring up inside the cab and putting the brake light there, that comes same place, comes, and it's in this conduit, and it runs up the tube and lights this one. This is not the light that came with this kit. It was a much smaller one, and it was non-functional. So I just chucked it and put a bigger one on, and that's great. Got a nice big brake light up top. It does not work as a tail light. It only works as a brake light. There's probably 15 of these on Amazon, and I'm sure other places too. You don't have to go to Amazon. put more money in Bezos' pocket. The main thing to look for is that it is adjustable, but be aware that you are not going to find enough adjustability to fit on this narrow beetle bed, so you're still going to have to modify it. I did not have to adjust the height. I kind of got lucky there. You know, it's pretty close, so we just went with the stock height, although it is shortened a little bit because I cut this angle here to try to match that forward lean a little bit. I did winch it together a little bit and kind of pinch it so there's a little tension across the top to narrow the top a little more than the bottom to get that angle close, but it wasn't a modification. That was just in how I bolted it together. All right, well, I hope that answers any questions or gives you ideas. Okay, last section here that I've promised is how to take the Jeep bumper and put it on your Beetle. Again, this is really something you could retrofit this, but it would be very challenging. I knew roughly what I was going to do as I was building this car. So this is I believe this is a TJ bumper. Again, marketplace find. The customer brought it to me. When I first put it on, before I did any trimming, I kind of argued with him. I said, hey, this is going to look like crap. I hate this. It's not going to work. And he's like, no, I think it's looking pretty good. We struggled with the height of it, and then obviously it was quite a bit longer. So the first modification I did to it was cutting off about that much from the ends here. So these were angled forward just a little bit, and I just cut those off and then cut the cap off and welded the cap back on from where I'd cut them off. So it's capped. If you look real close, you can see I went a little bit past the bend because I kind of like that just a little bit of forward bend there on the very end. I thought that looked kind of clean, especially with this taper coming in. But you could obviously bring it in further. You could do an angle, which might look pretty cool. Especially if you have it tucked back so that the pointy edge doesn't catch on somebody walking by, right? This might be sticking out a little too far if I had cut an angle on it, and that makes the cap a little bit harder to weld on, but not that big a deal. So there's a couple of options there. So for actually fitting it, these brackets, so this piece, the core of this piece is actually the factory bracket for the Jeep. It was longer, so I cut it this way. It was not tall enough. So the original holes were this hole and that hole. The Jeep is 1/2 inch wider. So these brackets here, this is a 2x2 box tubing that goes into the frame. Took the rear crash bar off and put this 2x2 into the frame, bolted in. Then obviously as I'm assembling the car, I had to work out where that hole was. I actually took those back out, put the roll pan on, and then fiddled around till I got it to get the hole in the right spot. Took a little bit of finagling, but it came out pretty good. You will notice that this edge here lines up with this edge, which is the bed wall, which is a pretty nice reference. So if you start with that edge, you're gonna get your lateral in the right spot. And then of course you measure 2 inches in to get the inside. And it's the same on the driver's side. So that's a 2-inch box coming out of the frame, hanging off here. So you can unbolt this, take this off, and you just have these two pieces of 2x2 sticking out of the back of the car. Took them off for paint, put them back on. Okay. I welded in a 1/4 inch thick piece of steel to the factory bracket on each side. Just another little plate to make, to narrow this inside edge to this inside edge to get it to the measurement for here, because the Jeep wants to be a 1/2 inch wider. You could simply cut that bracket all the way off and weld it back on where you want it. I was trying to avoid that because I liked the welds that were on there. They seemed good, heavy duty welds. But I did. So here's the embarrassing part. I made all my measurements for the height of this bumper. I didn't want the tailgate to hit it. And I made all my measurements right here at the corner and right here at this corner. And that's great, but it kicked me in the hiney because the tailgate has a bow, as anybody that has messed with one of these knows. So where I first had that bumper mounted, the tailgate sat on these two edges when you open the tailgate. And that obviously is not acceptable. So I had to redo those brackets to lower this guy 3/4 of an inch because I took my initial measurements here at this corner. So what I'm saying is make your measurements here when you're figuring out the height that you want on your bumper. So I ended up having to weld another plate on there and moving it down. So I went down actually an inch. So that was the original hole. That was where this bolt is. So I just moved it down and filled there was a 4th hole here and I just welded it closed. You definitely need 2 bolts. You cannot get away with 1 bolt. The bumper is gonna swing in due to the weight of it. It's pretty heavy. On the bottom side of this 2x2 is an L bracket welded on the bottom for this bolt to go through. And let me lay underneath here and see if I can get that. If you see it, you'll totally understand what I'm talking about. So there's an L bracket there, right here. And there's the other side of that bolt. The wiring comes through the 2x2. Oh man, excuse me. For mounting the lights. These were lights that the customer provided. They are simply trailer lights. They're nice LED waterproof. They're pretty cool. Tail and brake. And of course, when you wire in your converter, it will do turn signals also. But they were a little bit big, so I had to cut into the tubing. And then of course I had to treat the inside of this tubing. So you can see here where I cut in so that this light would fit all the way in. My goal was to get it behind this outside edge so that if someone bumps this car in the rear, it'll bump the bumper before it breaks the tail light. Fortunately, these are very cheap. I think they're 12 bucks a piece, and 2 bolts, pop it out, change the connectors on the back, and you can plug a new one in. So that's pretty easy. That's pretty cool. But if I was doing it again, what I would do is make a steel version of this, cut the tubing just a little bit bigger and cut it on the bottom and the top and weld that in and mount something like this that has an integrated backup light. I think that if that was recessed in there, that would just look fantastic. But I didn't think of these until I already had this all set up. There is a plate welded on the back side, basically about like this, with 3 holes, 2 holes for the screws and then a hole in the center for the wiring on the back side. Don't know if we'll be able to see it here. Yeah, the lighting's not very good. You can't really see the plate back there. And that plate was just to hold the light. And talking to Joel with, hey, what do you want me to do as we're figuring out reverse lights? And he said, yeah, just stay with these. He's happy with them. So we stayed with those and did not put these on. But if I was starting from scratch, I would probably put those on. Tons of things you could do with backup lights, and we went through a bunch of different things and decided to just go with my kind of standard up underneath. So there's our backup lights. You could use the factory little 1 inch or 3/4 inch white ones here. I've seen oval ones that are about 3/4 of an inch wide and maybe 2 inches. We played with putting those here or across here as backup lights. These are super bright and it's great, gives you great visibility, but the indicator for like going through the parking lot at your grocery store or the market or wherever, you know, you're standing behind the car, you may not notice those lights come on that car is backing up. Now, I don't have a problem with it. I am always backing up very carefully when I'm out in public. But I think you see the point that I'm talking about. Having some little kind of indicator isn't a bad idea. Will you get a ticket for it? I think it depends on your state. I think in Florida, no problem. We're kind of Florida man state, right? So I don't think we're gonna have any issue. By the way, this owner lives in Florida too. So that's the rear bumper. 2x2 going into the frame and bolted into the frame. Basically spacers welded on, and then dropping this about an inch from the factory hole. And I believe this was a TJ bumper. But if you look on Marketplace, there's all kinds of stuff. You can pick this stuff up for 50 bucks. A lot of times they have the entire bag of bolts and brackets, and then you can play with those. You could do this without any welding. It would be a little tricky, but it is doable. And you do want to be able to take it off. So if you got to clean or paint or what have you, or it gets damaged and you want to replace it. So again, just like with the bull bar, you want to make it removable. So you definitely want a bolt set up somewhere in the mount. If you have this welded here and have it just bolt inside, then you have to get your angle on these exactly parallel so that they'll slide into the frame, right? That 2x2. And I was afraid that, you know, contorting it with the welding, you know, heat distortion, it would get off a little bit and I wouldn't be able to put it in. So I made it bolt on both ends here, but the welding was in the light mount and trimming this down and then welding the cap back on. You could simply cut it off, buy a 2-inch or a 3, I can't remember whether this is 2-inch or 3-inch. That must be 3-inch. They have some pretty good plastic caps that pop on there. So you could get away without any welding on trimming it down. So anyway, that was my approach and how I got around it or got it done. Joel's super happy with it, so I'm happy with it. If I was starting all over again, I would definitely do the different lights, and I might start with a little bit different bumper. By the way, I did try putting it upside down with the continuous tube on the top, but to get it low enough to not impede the tailgate, it obscured the license plate. So then we were playing with putting the license plate on the bumper, and it just got to be too many things to modify. So we went back to the intentional way here. But you could do some pretty cool variations by doing it upside down. I think Don has done one upside down that looked pretty good with that continuous bar across there. So there are plenty of options out there. This was this build and how I conquered this particular one. Thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Please like and subscribe. You wouldn't believe how much that helps on the YouTube algorithm and getting this video to other people that are interested in this kind of stuff. Thanks for your attention. Take care of each other. We'll catch you on the next video.